I thought we were gathered for a simple Sunday lunch, the kind my mother had been preparing every week for as long as I could remember. Roast chicken with thyme and garlic, the good white dishes she only brought out when she wanted to pretend we were the kind of family that had everything together. I had driven 40 minutes to get there, the same 40 minutes I had been driving every Sunday for 6 years, because that was what you did for family, because I had genuinely believed, with the whole stubborn, devoted core of myself, that we were close, that we were the good kind of family, the real kind, not the kind that keeps secrets and maps out betrayals in quiet rooms while setting the table for Sunday lunch. I had no idea that by the time I was driving home that afternoon, my hands trembling so badly I had to pull over twice on Route 9 just to breathe, my entire understanding of my own childhood would be dismantled around me, piece by piece, like a house that was never as solid as it looked from the street. The document was sitting right there on the kitchen counter, folded in thirds, as casually as a grocery list, wedged between the pepper grinder and a glass of iced tea still sweating in the August heat. A legal transfer deed. My parents' house. The house where I had learned to ride a bicycle in the driveway, where I had cried through every heartbreak at the kitchen table, where I had offered twice in writing to help pay the mortgage when they struggled in 2019, had been signed over to my sister Lily. Not to both of us. Not split evenly. Not held in trust. Not explained or discussed or even mentioned in passing. Just to Lily alone, 2 weeks prior, quietly and completely, at a notary's office across town, without a single word spoken to me. And when I looked up from that paper, my mother was already watching me from across the counter with an expression I had never seen on her face in 30 years of being her daughter. It was not guilt. It was not sorrow. It was something far worse, something terrifyingly close to relief. To understand what happened that Sunday, you need to understand what I had built my life around and why the loss of it went so much deeper than the deed on the counter. I was 31 years old, 3 years into a career as a financial analyst at a mid-size firm in Hartford, Connecticut. I had my own apartment, a clean, bright one-bedroom on the 4th floor of a building with good bones and terrible elevator service. And I had savings, real savings, the kind that come from years of quiet discipline and skipped vacations and making coffee at home instead of buying it at the shop downstairs. I had a boyfriend named Daniel, steady and kind, who made me laugh and who never once made me feel like I had to shrink myself to fit beside him. My life was not glamorous, but it was mine, solid and intentional, and I was proud of it in the specific, private way you are proud of something you built entirely without anyone's help. My parents' house sat on Elmwood Drive, a quiet residential street about 12 miles outside of Hartford, where the yards were big enough to matter and the neighbors had been the same for 20 years. It was a colonial-style home, white with green shutters, with a wraparound porch my father had built himself the summer I turned 8. I remembered sitting on the top step of that porch on warm evenings, watching fireflies blink on and off in the long grass, while my father drank a cold beer and my mother read in the wicker chair, and the whole world felt entirely safe, entirely knowable, entirely good. That house smelled like cedar and old books and whatever my mother was cooking. Sage and butter in the fall, fresh basil in summer, cinnamon from Thanksgiving until New Year's without interruption. It was not a large house or an expensive one. It was the single physical place in the world that I had organized my entire emotional landscape around, the anchor point of every important memory I possessed, and I had never once questioned whether my connection to it was real or whether it was reciprocated. That kind of certainty, I was about to learn, is a very particular kind of blindness. My sister Lily was 5 years younger and had always been, by any honest measure, my parents' favorite. I had known this since I was 6 or 7, and I had spent most of my childhood explaining it away to myself with the kind of creative rationalization that children develop when the truth is too uncomfortable to hold directly. Lily was the younger one. She needed more attention. Lily was more sensitive, required more careful handling. Lily was funnier, more spontaneous, more naturally charming in the way that some people simply are. And parents, I told myself, are only human. I repeated these explanations for 25 years with such practiced conviction that I had almost come to believe the discrepancy didn't matter. that love came in different shapes, and I was receiving mine in a quieter form. I was, as I would eventually understand, profoundly and expensively wrong. Lily had never really left home in any meaningful sense. She attended a community college 20 minutes away, changed her major 3 times, and graduated with a degree in communications. She deployed as a social media consultant for small local businesses. She was not without ability. She worked, she had clients, she earned some money. But she had never built the forward momentum that forces you to construct a life of your own from scratch. She still had dinner with my parents 4 or 5 nights a week. She still called my mother twice a day, long, easy calls full of small details about her week, the kind of calls I never quite managed because there was always another meeting, another deadline, another thing that needed doing. She still borrowed the car when hers was in the shop, left her laundry in the dryer, kept a drawer at the house filled with her belongings. In the most complete sense, she was still her parents' child in a way that I, with my apartment and my savings account and my 40-minute Sunday commute, had simply ceased to be. I had thought, naively and stubbornly, that this was fine. I was wrong about that, too. The first warning came at Easter dinner, though it passed through me without leaving a visible mark. We were halfway through the meal, roast lamb, the house smelling extraordinary, rich with rosemary and garlic, when my father asked, entirely casually, how my 401k was looking. I told him it was doing well, that I had recently increased my contributions. He nodded, and he said something I filed away without examining. "It's good that you're self-sufficient, Clara. It's really good." Then he glanced at Lily for a brief, ordinary moment, and I dismissed it completely. The second warning came in June, on a Thursday evening when I called my mother from my car in the parking garage, the concrete around me gray and cool and echoey with distant sounds. We talked about ordinary things, a neighbor's renovation, a book she was reading. And then she mentioned, as if it were an afterthought, that she and my father had been meeting with their financial advisor. "Just planning ahead," she said. I said that was sensible. She said, "Of course, you know how your father is." I said goodnight and drove home and made dinner and did not think about it again until that night, lying in bed when something small and indistinct moved through me. Not quite a feeling, more like the shadow of one. And then it was gone. The third sign I actually noticed, turning it over for several days before setting it down. At my mother's birthday dinner in July, Lily was talking about redecorating the guest bedroom at Elmwood Drive. New shelving, a different color scheme. And my parents were listening with that particular focused quality of attention they always gave her when she was excited. I said lightly, "Are you moving back in, Lily?" She laughed and said, "Well, eventually it'll be my house anyway, right?" My mother smiled. My father took a sip of his wine. No one corrected her. No one said ours and Clara's. No one said anything at all, and the table moved on, and I sat there for 3 full seconds in a cold, still silence that nobody else seemed to notice, telling myself it was nothing, just Lily being careless with words. I had been telling myself that for 26 years. It was the most expensive habit I ever had. The Sunday in August started like all the others. I arrived at 11:30, carrying a bottle of Pinot Grigio because my mother appreciated the gesture even if she rarely finished a second glass. The day was blazingly hot and very bright, the kind of August morning that makes everything look slightly overexposed. The grass too green, the sky too intensely blue, shadows impossibly sharp against white siding. My mother met me at the door in her navy apron, the good one with the embroidered edge, and she hugged me and said the chicken would be ready in 20 minutes and that Lily was out back. The house smelled exactly as it always did. Roasting garlic, old cedar, the faint floral drift from a candle on the console table, a candle I had given my mother the previous Christmas. Everything was exactly as it always was. That was the detail that would stay with me longest, how completely, how cruelly ordinary the morning had seemed. I went to the kitchen to pour a glass of water, and that was when I saw it. The document lay on the counter, folded in thirds, partly visible beside the pepper grinder. I almost didn't reach for it. It wasn't addressed to me, wasn't mine, was just a piece of paper on the counter of a house I had visited 100 times. But something made me pick it up. Some quiet alarm bell that had been sounding at low frequency since Easter, and had just, in this particular moment, grown loud enough to hear. I unfolded it. I read the header. I read it twice and then a third time because my brain insisted it had misread something. Quitclaim deed, transfer of property. The property at 14 Elmwood Drive, the house with the fireflies and the porch my father built, was being transferred in full to one Lily Ann Mercer. The signatures were dated August 9th. It was now August 23rd, 2 weeks ago. My parents had signed this document 2 weeks ago, and in the 14 days since, I had spoken to my mother on the phone twice, texted my father a funny article about baseball, and nobody had said a single word, not a hint, not a warning, not one syllable. I don't know how long I stood there, long enough for the words to blur and sharpen and blur again, long enough for the full sequence of denial to run its course. There must be another page, a clause I'm missing, some administrative error. I turned the paper over. There was no other page. The refrigerator hummed. The neighbor's sprinkler made its slow, rhythmic sweep. My hands were perfectly still, which surprised me because inside I felt something splitting apart slowly, the way ice fractures on a lake in late winter, not all at once, not with any sound, but with a quiet and absolute and irreversible certainty. I heard my mother's footsteps return to the kitchen. I heard them stop. She was standing in the doorway holding a dish towel, and she did not move, and she did not speak. The look on her face, that expression of tired, exhausted relief, told me everything I needed to know before either of us spoke a word. She had not been dreading this moment. She'd been waiting for it, as if the secret had been a weight she was finally setting down. "Mom," I said. My voice was perfectly quiet. It did not shake, which surprised me. "What is this?" She set the towel on the counter. She pressed her lips together in that way she always had, a gesture I had seen 10,000 times and always read as thoughtfulness. "Clara," she said, "let's sit down." "I don't want to sit down," I said. "I want you to tell me what this is." She pulled out a chair at the kitchen table anyway and sat with her hands folded in her lap, as if the act of sitting were a script she was following. And then she said, in the measured tone of someone who has rehearsed a conversation until its roughest edges are worn smooth, "Your father and I have been doing some estate planning. We wanted the house to stay in the family, given that Lily is the one who has always been here, who has been helping us, who is building her life close by. We felt it made the most sense for the house to go to her." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, through the window over the sink, I could see Lily in the backyard sitting in a lawn chair with her feet crossed at the ankles, scrolling on her phone, utterly still in the particular way of someone who has nothing left to worry about. "You gave her the house," I said. Not a question, just the words, placed carefully. "We've provided for you in other ways," my mother said, her voice gentle now in that specific way she used when she wanted something to be over. "You have your career, your savings. You've always been so capable, Clara. You've never needed—" "You gave her the house," I said again quietly, without telling me, without one single conversation. My mother's chin lifted slightly. "It's our property. We don't need your permission." And there it was, not an apology, not even a justification, just the blunt, flat assertion of a hierarchy that had existed my entire life without ever being stated this plainly. The warm, garlic-scented kitchen with the good white dishes felt suddenly like a stage set, every beloved detail maintained to support a story that wasn't quite true. I heard the back door open. I heard Lily's footsteps on the tile. "Oh," she said from behind me, her voice carrying that quality of surprised innocence I would later spend a great deal of time examining. "You found it." I turned around. She was standing in the doorway to the yard, still holding her phone, wearing a yellow sundress, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, looking at me with an expression I could not immediately name, not quite guilt, not quite pity. Something more complicated. The expression of someone who has been waiting for a bill to arrive and has been hoping quietly that someone else would answer the door when it did. "Lily," I said. Her name felt strange on my tongue, like a word in a language I had just realized I'd been mispronouncing for years. "How long have you known about this?" She glanced at my mother. My mother looked at the table. The silence between them was so fluent, so completely practiced, that it told me everything before either of them spoke. "A few months," Lily said at last. Since the spring, since before Easter, since before my father looked across the table and told me it was a good thing I was self-sufficient. 4 months. They had known for 4 months, and I had driven this road every Sunday, and I had brought wine, and I had sat at this table, and I had been, in every way that mattered, completely alone in a room full of people I thought I knew better than anyone else on earth. My father appeared in the doorway from the hallway a few seconds later, holding a folded section of the newspaper as if he had simply been interrupted while reading. He was wearing his weekend clothes, the faded blue polo, the khaki pants he'd owned since I was in high school, and he looked at me, then at the document in my hands, then at my mother, and then he said, in the voice he used when he most wanted to sound reasonable, "Clara, come sit down. Let us explain." "Explain what?" "Exactly," I said. He moved into the kitchen and pulled out the chair next to my mother. They sat facing me across the table, side by side like a tribunal that had been convened and prepared and was only now, finally, in session. Lily remained in the doorway behind me. I could feel her presence there, uncertain, positioned between the yard and the kitchen, between participant and observer, not yet sure which role she was playing in this scene. "We love you both equally," my father began, and I felt something I can only describe as a slow electrical failure. Every circuit in my body tripping at once, not with heat but with cold, a spreading and numbing cold that started in my chest and moved outward to my fingertips. "Don't," I said. "Don't start with that." He stopped. He looked at his hands, folded on the table in front of him. "The truth is that we were worried about the house, about what would happen to it after we're gone. Lily is here. She has always been here. And she doesn't have what you have. You're established, Clara. You have your career, your savings, your apartment. You don't need—" "You keep saying that," I said. "You keep saying I don't need it. But you never asked me. You never once asked me whether I needed it or wanted it or whether it mattered to me. You just decided. You decided that because I built something of my own, I forfeit everything else. You decided that Lily's dependence is worth rewarding and my independence is worth punishing." The word landed in the silence like something dropped from a height. Punishing. My mother flinched, a tiny imperceptible contraction around her eyes. My father said nothing. The refrigerator hummed in its steady, indifferent way. And then, from the doorway behind me, Lily spoke. "There's something else you should know." Her voice was quieter than usual, stripped of its ordinary brightness, the way a room sounds when someone has turned off a light you didn't realize was on. I turned. She was looking at the floor. Her phone was in her hand, but she wasn't looking at it. She looked genuinely uncomfortable in a way that was different from the careful innocence she had been performing since she walked in from the yard. "Lily!" my mother said sharply, a single word like a hand pressed flat against a door. "She's going to find out anyway," Lily said without looking up. "She should hear it from us." The silence that followed was different from the others. The others had been full of things unsaid. This one felt full of something about to be said, something the room itself was bracing for, the way air thickens before a storm. I looked at my sister. I looked at my mother. I looked at my father, who was staring at the table with an expression I had never seen on his face, not quite guilt and not quite shame, but somewhere in the dark between them. "What else?" I said. Lily finally looked up at me. Her eyes were dark and very steady. "The life insurance policy, Dad's, they changed the beneficiary last year. Before, it was split between us, 50-50 the way it had always been. Now it goes entirely to me." The kitchen was absolutely, completely still. I heard my own breathing. I was aware of the weight of the deed in my hand, the slight stiffness of the paper, the small columns of legal text. Not just the house. The insurance policy, too, changed a full year ago. A year before Easter. A year before any of the warning signs I had dismissed. A year of Sundays I had driven here and brought wine and said goodnight, while my family had already, quietly, rewritten the terms of what I was. "A year ago," I said. The words came out flat and even, read aloud from a document. "We were trying to be practical," my mother said, and I heard in her voice for the first time that afternoon the discomfort of someone whose story is no longer quite holding its shape. Lily doesn't have savings, doesn't have a pension. We were trying to make sure she would be okay. And I said quietly. What was I? An afterthought? The one who would always be fine because she always is? No one answered. That silence was, in its way, the most complete answer they could have given me. You've always been so capable, my mother said finally, in the gentle tone she used when she wanted something to end. We've always known you could handle anything. We were proud of that. I looked at my mother for a long moment. I had heard these words in various forms my entire life. The capable one, the strong one, the one who doesn't need. I had worn the description like a medal for so long that I had not noticed, not fully, not until this exact moment, that it had also been serving as a reason, not given because they were proud of me, but used because it was convenient, because a daughter who doesn't need is a daughter who doesn't require anything from you, and there is a particular kind of parent who finds that arrangement deeply, quietly useful. I hear you, I said, and I said nothing else. I drove home in a state I would later struggle to describe. Shock is the obvious word, but it was not accurate. Shock implies something sudden, and what I had felt in that kitchen was less like a blow and more like the slow, nauseating revelation that the floor you have been walking on your entire life is hollow. Not dangerous, not crumbling, just hollow. Built to look and feel solid, hollow all the way through. And now you know it. You will always know it. I pulled over on Route 9, as I had known I would need to, and I sat with my hands in my lap and the engine idling and the August heat pressing against the glass. I let myself feel it, not the anger. That would come later, clean and cold and extraordinarily useful. What I felt first was grief. Old grief, the kind that accumulates in small, unexamined amounts for years and suddenly reaches the surface all at once. Grief for the Easter dinners and birthday dinners and Sunday lunches that had not been what I believed them to be. Grief for the version of my family I had constructed so carefully, explanation by explanation, for 25 years. Grief for the girl on the top step of the porch who had felt completely and unquestioningly safe. I sat there for a long time, and then I called Daniel. He answered on the second ring, and he said my name in the particular way he had when he could hear something wrong from the first syllable, and I told him everything. The deed, the insurance policy, the 4 months, Easter and June and Lily in the yellow sundress, saying you found it as if the only thing that had gone wrong was my timing. Daniel listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he said very quietly, "What do you need right now?" I thought about it for one honest moment. "I need the name of a good estate attorney," I said, "and I need you to not tell me to give them time." He said he would have a name for me by morning. Then, softer, "Clara, are you okay?" I looked through the windshield at the long August light. "No," I said, "but I'm going to be." I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark of my apartment staring at the ceiling and thinking, for the first time without flinching, about everything I had refused to fully see. The pattern was clear now. Absurdly, almost insultingly clear, the way certain things only become visible once you stop trying not to see them. Lily had been given more her entire life, more attention, more latitude, more enthusiasm for her plans, more forgiveness for her mistakes. I had been given the role of the capable one, the one who didn't need, and I had accepted it, had even been grateful for it because it was the only form of recognition available to me. I had mistaken competence for love. I had mistaken their confidence in my self-sufficiency for evidence that they were proud of me. What it had actually been was permission not to try. I had made it easy for them. I had made it possible. And I had called that a good childhood for 31 years. In the morning, I had a name, Rachel Torres, estate and property attorney. I called her office at 9:15. I had an appointment by the end of the week. Rachel Torres was a compact, precise woman in her 40s, with the manner of someone who has heard many variations of this story and has long since ceased to be surprised. She listened, asked careful questions, took notes in a narrow script. I brought everything: the photograph of the deed, the 2019 email thread in which I had formally offered to contribute to the mortgage. an offer my parents had declined in writing, which established a documented acknowledgement of my financial engagement with the property, and 2 years of bank records showing household transfers I had made to help with expenses. "The deed stands," Rachel said. "That's their right. But the insurance policy is a different matter, particularly if the supporting documentation misrepresents the financial arrangement between your sister and your parents." 6 weeks later, she called with what she had found. The beneficiary change had been made in conjunction with a document formalizing Lily as primary household contributor, naming financial contributions Lily had allegedly made over the preceding 2 years. When Rachel requested the supporting bank records, those contributions turned out to be largely non-existent. The document had misrepresented the arrangement. It had been quietly drawn up by a local attorney whose methods Rachel recognized and did not admire, signed without disclosure to me, while I drove to Elmwood Drive every Sunday and said goodnight like everything was fine. This was not grounds to overturn the policy entirely. Rachel was clear-eyed about what was achievable, but it was grounds for a formal dispute, for an investigation, and for a conversation in a conference room that would be considerably more uncomfortable than anything my parents had anticipated. The conference room meeting happened in November. Both my parents were present, their attorney beside them. It lasted 3 hours. I did not cry once. I sat across the table from my mother in her good gray coat, my father in his weekend blazer, both of them looking older and smaller and less certain of the ground beneath them than they had in that kitchen in August. And I said the things I had spent 3 months learning to say. Not with heat, not with tears. Just clearly, just accurately, just true. The quitclaim deed stood. The house was Lily's, and I had made my peace with that. What changed was the insurance policy. Not 50-50, but an equitable split, formally documented, signed by all parties in a room where everyone finally knew exactly what was being acknowledged. Lily met me in the parking garage afterward, alone, in a dark green wool coat with her hands in its pockets, her breath visible in the November cold. "I'm sorry, Clara," she said. "When they first told me, I should have called you." I looked at my sister, who had grown up in the same house and somehow arrived at adulthood with entirely different maps. "You should have," I said. "I think you knew that, but I think you were scared of what it would mean if you did." She nodded. Her eyes were bright. "Are we going to be okay?" I thought about it honestly, standing there in the gray November light. "I don't know yet," I said. "Ask me in a year." It was not a cruel answer. It was the truest one I had. The following March, I sat on the top step of the porch of a house on Birchwood Lane, a 2-bedroom Craftsman I had purchased 5 months earlier with a down payment built over 6 years of discipline and intention, 20 miles from Hartford and 12 miles from Elmwood Drive. The porch was not finished. No wicker chair, no comfort beyond the step itself and the cold early spring air and the long, pale light of a March afternoon lying across the yard in flat, clean sheets of gold. I had driven past Elmwood Drive once in October without stopping. Lily's car was in the driveway. The green shutters were unchanged. The wraparound porch my father had built the summer I turned 8 was exactly as it had always been, and I was not prepared for how much that steadiness would feel like grief. And also, underneath the grief, quietly and unmistakably, like freedom. The porch on Birchwood Lane needed sanding and paint and new boards near the railing. Daniel had already priced the lumber. We were going to do it on a Saturday in April, and I was going to feel the specific private satisfaction of something built by hand, something that was entirely and irrevocably mine, not inherited, not assigned, not signed over by someone else's decision in a quiet office across town. Mine, in the only way that actually holds, earned, over time, without anyone's permission. Some things cannot be passed down. Some things have to be built from the ground up, with materials you gather yourself, on the foundation you lay, in the place you choose. That kind of thing does not arrive folded in thirds between a pepper grinder and a glass of iced tea. It comes slowly, and it costs something, and when you finally have it, you know, in a way you cannot unknow, exactly what it is worth. It turns out I had always known how to build. I had simply not understood, until that Sunday in August, that everything I needed was already in my hands.